And Mr. Orr, will you lead us in the discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The board directed that we come back with a different spending plan today. Prior to Mr. McDonald going over that spending plan, I do have a few comments about the last 8 years. Cuts faced by non-public safety NCC departments have been significant. Those departments have absorbed 18 to 20% in labor cost over the 8 years. The auditor controller's NCC has been cut 55.5%. The treasurer tax collector has been cut 63.3%. County council 56.8%. Ag 24.4%. Purchasing 27%. Code 46.9%. Animal control 9.4%. Public health 59.4%. Environmental health 78.3%. Medically indigent services program 47.4%. Department of Public Social Services 45.8%. California Children's Services 17.2%. Over this 8-year time, general government has been cut 17.55%. Health and Human Services an average of 39.41%. Public safety has grown 21.92%. The growth from 08-09 in NCC has gone from approximately $810.3 million to $821.3 million, only a growth of 1.37%. That's why over the past months, or perhaps years, I've been indicating to board that we have a spending issue that does not match our revenue in relationship to public safety. The non-public safety NCC departments and all other departments have shown leadership in meeting their budget targets. Even the sheriff this year will meet his budget target and return approximately $8 million to the general fund. Probation has met their targets. Public defender has met their targets. No one likes the position that we're in. So the board hired KPMG, and we anticipated using reserves to cover the public safety spend during the implementation and review of the KPMG process. Today, as we sit here with the gray case, starting out as a $40 million increase in cost, weaker revenues than anticipated, and we must not forget ECDC coming on board around the corner with another cost of $40 million. It's time for everyone to pull together and face the deficit. It may be uncomfortable. It will be uncomfortable. It may lead to contentious discussions here. It may lead to contentious discussions with KPMG in that ad hoc committee. But we have run out of options in cutting non-public safety NCC unless the board wishes to continue to cut there and jeopardize general government. In doing so, there are certain consequences, not just in the review of the budget, but in areas like child protective services, adult protective services, and so forth, that in fact are needed for a sustainable community and for public protection in those areas. I believe the board is going to have a healthy discussion today. I believe there'll be some presentations. It's my intent to freeze unfunded positions as the CEO. It is my intent that no position in this county will be filled unless there is dollars to match that position. The HR director needs to sign off on positions and hiring before anyone arrives on board to make sure we have money behind that position. We expect and trust, as has been the case, that all department heads, appointed or elected, to execute their budget within the board-approved plan today. I do need to caution the board and department heads that delay in execution only increases the cost and further reductions that must take place as the year progresses, creating a risk for all. While this is the end of July, we are 2 months into the budget year. The end of August, we're 3 months into the budget year. First quarter report does not come to the board until November. Making any corrections at that time only doubles the action that needs to be taken by any specific department. So all departments need to understand their leadership role and execution of their budget as the board decides today. Paul?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you. As the CEO indicated, we are here essentially to recap the recommendations presented to you on the 28th of June. I'll remind you that the plan was constructed to hold reserves at the $150 million level. And as the CEO indicated, once adopted, we really do need all departments to come in and meet their targets. The greatest area of concern will be in public safety, specifically the district attorney's office and the sheriff's office, because we have not funded their full request. Page 3 shows graphically what the next 3 years look like. I'll note that reserves bottoms out a year from now. Reserve will bottom out a year from now in the next budget year at $150 million, at which point we are then able to rebuild reserves, since at that point you'll note that revenues cross over and exceed finally expenses. The revenues of the green line, the red line represents expenditures. Keeping spending level for a number of years in a row will be the challenge. To accomplish that, we do need to find efficiencies across the board, and has been discussed already. That work is underway with our own internal resources as well as with KPMG. Page 4 is the revised plan. This is the same page that we showed you on the 28th. It funds a portion of the additional requests, and it brings in additional one-time and ongoing resources, and I've got detail on this on the page which follows. I do want to note that we do not have the final solution here, but we are anticipating that there will be unspent proceeds, fund balance, which will be brought in this year. Specifically, at the close, specifically, we're looking at $12 million for the coming year. That's what's represented by that $23 million number at the bottom of that page. Page 5 shows the additions and deletions, which, if enacted as presented, will allow us to keep reserves at the $150 million level. The key column is the column at the right. Before I conclude, let me say a few words about the district attorney's budget. An additional $18 million plus was requested. We funded $6 million, leaving a potential shortfall of $12 million. We have looked in detail at that budget and believe the office could close its shortfall with far less than $12 million in funding, and with little or no layoffs. I expect that we may hear from Mr. Hestrin this morning, and if so, I'll reserve any further comment on that budget unit until he has a chance to speak. So in wrapping up, our recommendation is to approve the revisions as presented or as modified. You do have the ability to modify the recommendations further today. To adopt the technical corrections included in Ordinance 440, and finally to direct all department heads to take the necessary steps to spend no more than appropriated. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Paul, colleagues? Not at this time. Okay. This is basically the outline we talked about a month ago. I have a request to speak from Mr. Hestrin.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the board, Mr. Orr, Mr. Priamos. I want to go on record as saying that I approve of the changes made at the atrium menu. So, sorry, Mr. Jeffries. I must address you again on the issues of the district attorney's budget. It's been a long budget season, so I will do everyone the favor of getting right to the point. No fluff and certainly no sweet talk. Unfortunately, the math and the facts of our situation have not changed. We have an $18.2 million inherited structural deficit that I cannot remedy by belt tightening, cuts to training and travel, or any other discretionary spending. Remember that the discretionary spending in my budget amounts to $700,000. Even if I cut all of it, I cannot fill an $18.2 million hole. The DA's structural deficit is made up of accumulated labor increases as well as the resulting increases in internal service fees, so-called ISF increases. The budget document that you consider today recommends an additional $6 million in funding for the district attorney's office. While we appreciate that, that leaves us with $12.25 million shortfall. That shortfall, if not remedied, would constitute an additional 10% cut to the district attorney's office budget. And I would remind you all that from 2011 to today, the office has been cut 27% already. We went from over 800 employees to today we have 705 employees. I want to add, simply forcing departments, any departments, to absorb increased labor costs without adequate funding is in fact a cut to our department and to public safety. So what is the bottom line? And here I need to speak plainly and bluntly. Without additional funding, the DA's office will bust Appropriation 1 sometime in the spring of 2017. A budget is supposed to be a realistic estimate of what things cost throughout the year, but a budget that does not take into account what things actually cost is not a budget at all. And honest budgeting has got to be the heart of transparent government. So, we need clear direction. Do we begin the process of layoffs, or do we wait and hope for additional funding from savings elsewhere? If it is to be layoffs, so be it. But we need to move, as Mr. Orr said, deliberately, because time is of the essence. In order to save enough money in salary by slashing our workforce, we need to do it early enough, or we won't realize the savings from the salaries. If your direction is that we continue working into the first quarter to find additional funding, then I need that direction as well. But thus far, the message has been, frankly, muddled and confused. The message I've gotten is that there's no additional funding available for the DA's office, but that we should not begin moving towards layoffs. These two positions are mutually exclusive. We simply cannot do both. So our position is untenable and unsustainable. We need either some assurance that we will receive additional funding or a clear message that it's time to lay off and cut into services. We are stuck in a state of limbo, and we need your leadership on this issue. I want to make a comment about KPMG. I have greatly enjoyed working with KPMG over the last year. Ian McPherson and his team are professional, straightforward, and honest, which has been like a breath of fresh air. But I have to say, if it's going to be layoffs, the cuts at the DA's office are going to be deep cuts. If we decide that the way out of our fiscal problem is to slash our workforce and further restrict services, why did we need KPMG to do that? We've done layoffs before in this county. We could have done layoffs on our own and saved the $18 million we paid to KPMG. I thought the whole idea of bringing KPMG was to reform the way we do business and bend the cost curve down deliberately over time, precisely to avoid massive cuts in public safety. I thought the whole idea of bringing KPMG was that we would find efficiencies to deliver service to the public at less cost. That and KPMG's mission I support wholeheartedly. We should be taking a critical view of all our operations and the way we operate and do business. In closing, you have my assurance that my office will continue to work with the EO's office and the CFO as best we can to come up with solutions to this mess. And we will continue to work with KPMG to look for efficiencies, but tough decisions have to be made. And I open it up for questions that you may have.
Yes, please don't go, because I'm sure there'll be some questions beyond those that are already asking. I've got some. Supervisor Washington?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hestrin,
Yes.
first of all, thank you for your diligence and your hard work. Your office is doing tremendous work, and I appreciate your leadership, and I also appreciate you being part of the team. And, you know, part of my district, I'm really struggling with getting my hands around some crime issues, and I think you're very much needed to be a part of that effort for it to succeed. I don't know that I see the answer to that being found in layoffs in your department. So do you have a number that you can tell me that I can ask my colleagues to join me in
Yes.
supporting, that at least we can avoid layoffs?
Yes, Supervisor Washington. Our original ask was 18-point-something million. By making all the cuts that we can make, I believe that we can avoid layoffs with an additional $6 million. So we have already been slotted by the CFO and by the EO's office for $6 million of additional funding. We need an additional $6 million, and I believe I can bring in the budget under that without, or at that or under that without having to resort to layoffs.
Thank you. That's what I'll be asking my colleagues to join me in supporting an additional $6 million.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Any others? Okay, I'm going to have to weigh in on a little different vein. I appreciate your coming out to see me last week and making some of these arguments. It caused me to spend a good deal of time over the last several days reflecting on where we're at, specifically with your budget. I also asked the EO's, the executive officer and the finance officer for some background. You mentioned you were hiring a few people. I found out over the weekend it was 18 people that were hired in the last 30, 45 days. Is that correct?
I don't believe so, sir. No, I can tell you, and I think you're referring to this document that was sent out to all of you?
No, I hadn't got to that one yet. I'm just talking about hiring.
Yes,
You've mentioned at least a dozen times in your 3 minutes here the word layoff.
Yes.
You also know that we are short on funding for everybody across the board.
Yes, sir.
But it's my understanding that you've hired 18 people in the last couple of months. I'd ask Mr. Mike Stock to please come step forward and clarify for me if I've got my facts wrong.
Well, let me address that here, if I could.
Well, okay.
We have.
I'd like to have Mr. Stock first check my numbers on the hiring. Mr. Stock, could you please?
Mike Stock, Assistant CEO, HR Director, Mr. Chairman, board members, Mr. Orr, Mr. Ramos. It is true that in the last 2 weeks, we did meet with members of the District Attorney's Office, and we reviewed offers and acceptances that were made to a number of different positions. I believe at the conclusion of the first meeting, there were 18 that we approved as exceptions to the hiring freeze, not as exceptions to the District Attorney's approved budget. These were for individuals. Some of them were grant-funded positions, investigators, district attorneys that were coming on that had been interns for the last couple of years. Again, it was presented to us, or we responded to it as exceptions to the imposed NCC hiring freeze, not as exceptions to the board-approved budget. So there have been a number of positions where people have started in the district attorney's office in the last 30 days, yes.
And in those positions, you were actually made aware of them after they were already offered positions and were working, is that correct?
Yes, but that's not unusual for the HR department to find out afterwards, because we provide certified lists to the departments review those, interview, and make their offers, and that's the case in most of the departments.
Okay, it was my understanding with the hiring freeze, so we would be approving those in advance of them actually coming to work. Is that not true?
Well, we would hope that, yes, sir.
I beg your pardon?
We would hope that to be yes, sir, but we were
Okay.
looking at ones that had already been offered positions. These people had already started the jobs.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Hestrin, you'd like to say something?
Yes, I would. So we worked with County HR and the EO's office for all positions that we hired, but I would remind that last year we had 732 positions at the DA's office. Last year, when I spoke to this board, we had 732. Today, we have 705. So any positions were filled attrition, people that left, people that moved on to other jobs, and that attrition hiring was approved by the EO's office, not only in principle, but specifically. You may not realize it, but I don't have the power, unlike most other departments, I don't have the power to hire. I've got to get all my positions approved by the EO's office. So every single position that I bring in, we work with the county, we work with the EO to get that approved. So the positions you're talking about, I didn't know if there was 18 or what there were, but now I understand what your question is. Those were positions that we worked with the county over a course of many months and made offers before the hiring freeze went into effect. So our position was we need to honor those offers, otherwise the county's going to have liability.
Well, and I don't mean to argue about that. My point is that hiring is continuing even in light of the fact that you're potentially looking at layoffs, and that seems to be inherently in conflict.
Well, Supervisor Benoit, with all due respect, you haven't told us, you haven't given us any direction that we're going towards layoffs. If we are going towards layoffs, then we will do that.
Well, we would rather.
What I'm here today is asking for direction from this board.
We would rather use attrition and reassignment, which would imply that you don't hire people in the short term until we get to the point where we're sure where you're at. And as I discussed with you, waiting until the end of the first quarter to see where you're at would be a better approach than immediately initiating layoffs, particularly if, in fact, you could avoid those by not hiring in the interim.
Well, I haven't done any hiring since we had the meeting where you talked about the shortfall. The hiring you're talking about happened months ago.
Okay, I was understanding it happened the last couple of weeks. But
well, they may have become official, but the hiring happened months ago.
Okay, there's a difference in terminology there that maybe we need to explore further later. Supervisor Tavaloni was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
I understand I wasn't being heard well. Mike Stock, could you come up again, please? I'm reading from some information that you provided my chief of staff, and this apparently is in budget year 15-16, but what I need to know, and perhaps you can answer this as well as Mr. McDonald, it's regarding 86 personnel transactions for the district attorney's office. And what I'd like to know is, and I'll list these, but the question is going to be, are these 86 transactions regarding personnel what appears to affect the 15-16 budget? Are they approved within the 15-16 budget? If not, are they going to roll over and impact the 16-17 budget, which is causing the break, if you will, or the bust of Mr. Hestrin? So what I see here is 86, which is 42 competitive promotions, 19 new hires, 18 promotional gross, 34 attorney transactions of 18 competitive promotions, 15 investigators of 10, which includes 10 new hires, 15 victim services promotions, a lot of promotions and what appears to be some additional hires. Can you tell me, are those new hires and were those approved within the 15-16 budget, or are they being rolled over into the 16-17 and being asked to be approved now?
That's a lot in one question.
I know.
But I'll try. Human Resources Department works with the departments, and when we're asked to process the paperwork for a promotion or to recruit for a position, Human Resources does not look at the budget that the department has. We rely on the fact that the department heads have approved budgets, and we rely on them for their budget. In other words, we do not budget check requests for promotions, requests for recruitments. That's the role of the executive office, and as Mr. Orr stated, on a go-forward basis, we've been working together on that. When we get a request for recruitment, we have this hiring freeze in place for NCC and ISF dollars. We are working with the executive office to make sure that it's supported in their budget. So with respect to the 15-16, we had no hiring freeze in place. If Mr. Hestrin or someone from his staff asked us to work through the process for promotion or to hire an investigator, we would do that, and we didn't convey any, or we didn't request any information from the EO on that. We rely on the department heads to make sure that they have the money for those.
Okay, Paul, I see you back there.
Yes, Supervisor, I think you've hit on the crux of the issue here. The 15-16 budget, as adopted and subsequently amended, had a shortfall. We had more bodies on the books, if you will, than we had approved spending for personnel. At this point, our current estimate is that expenditures for salaries and benefits and other personnel costs will exceed approved appropriations by approximately $5 to $6 million for 15-16. We are anticipating that we will find ourselves in a similar situation for the coming year, absent any further action. That includes the additional $6 million in funding that is on the list for today. So as the district attorney has indicated, they have a certain amount of funding, but at the same time we have these positions that have been approved. But the reality is that we don't have approved funding for all of those positions.
So, in a nutshell, what I think you just said is that in 15-16, in a budget that had not been, where they didn't have enough money, enough funding for new hires, and in turn, a lot of promotions, they promoted 60 attorneys, it appears, and had 19 new hires, actually.
Supervisor, that's just not accurate, what
Well,
you're saying.
it's right here. It's right here, Mike.
And I want to comment about that, because the information, this is one of the problems we have in this county, is a lack of communication. No one ever called our office. Last year, I was here and I said, and I invited all of you, please call me, and we can go over numbers. But the way it works in this county is that it's sent, information is sent to you with no vetting through the department, no input. This is why we need direct communication with the supervisors. So let me address some of what you're saying, Supervisor Tavallone. 35 of the promotions you mentioned were mandated promotions through the MOU. In our county, as you well know, that most of our promotions happen automatically through no discretion of ours. Those are MOU-driven promotions based on agreements that you yourselves have negotiated. Several of the promotions in the investigators that you mentioned, we promoted into a whole new class because we got rid of a higher paying class. So this was a restructure of our bureau that was designed to save money and actually reduce the amount of money that our bureau costs. So you can look at the number of promotions and say, wow, they promoted, but what's missing conveniently is that we eliminated a whole class of supervision and we cut way back on the cost. So those are the kind of things I would expect you want me to do, is to look for ways to still govern the office and manage the office, yet be more efficient and look for ways to do it with less funding and less spending. So you're getting information that's out of context, Supervisor Tavallone. The bottom line is this: we have significantly less positions at the end of this year than we did at the end of last year.
You may have, but it's coming right off of PeopleSoft, and those positions, PeopleSoft, the HR system, and whether they're less, it's costing more.
No, it's not costing more. It's costing less.
Okay. Bottom line is, we only have so much money.
I understand, and that's why I'm here asking for direction. If it's time for layoffs, let's move towards layoffs.
Mr. DA, let me just You held up a different form a few minutes ago when you, yeah, I think that's the same one I'm looking at, and that's, is that the court statistics?
Court statistics, yes.
Yeah. And you know, I know you're in a very difficult position. I mean, I think the first time we sat down together, you were the union negotiator asking us for much more raises than they eventually got.
I was a union negotiator at one time, but, you know, when I negotiated those increases and those raises, I fully expected that those would be paid for, not taken out of the department's
Well, they have to be
budget.
paid for, and
Yes.
they have to be paid for out of the county coffers. And,
That's right.
And we may have a disagreement on the best way to account for that, but the truth is, you were negotiating for a lot more. Your predecessors negotiated for a lot more. And when I look at the numbers on that court statistics, it just seems like we've got to take a good hard look at this whole process, and that's part of where we're doing this intensive evaluation of all the departments and all the public safety spend, because if I look at felony filings in around 2005 and 6 in Riverside County, we had approximately 18,300 felony filings a year.
No, Supervisor, that's in error, and I can explain why it's in error, and it goes back to our dysfunction in this county.
Okay, well, these
may I
numbers are
explain-
from the
may I
courts. Tell
explain
us
it?
why they're wrong.
May I explain it?
Yes.
This document was sent to all of you by our EO's office, but never was this, and this document contains stats and statistics about the DA's office. But again, nobody ever called us to say, are these numbers right? And their numbers are wrong. All you have to do is check with the courts. They do not include juvenile cases. They do not include Prop 47 cases. They do not include appellate cases. They do not include cases that weren't resolved within 1 year, which is many of our cases. The numbers are flat wrong. And you would have known that if anybody from the county had called us and said, hey, let's get together and talk about the numbers. I met with Mr. McDonald yesterday. My staff has met with the EO's office and the financial office numerous times. Nobody ever mentions these, Supervisor. So how are we to get on the same page?
Well,
I mean,
let
we
me
can
just
have
say
to-
that
we
I
can-
hear from the executive office on numerous times when they've asked for information from the district attorney's office, and of all of the county offices, you're the hardest to get the information from.
Oh, that's
And
totally
up to and including
inaccurate.
Supervisor Jeffries asking for information a month ago and getting it from all the other
We
agencies.
provided it.
Not before the meeting that information was asked for. None of that information was available to us at the budget hearing because your office, unlike all the others, had not responded. But that's another discussion. On that same chart, there's a number called felony jury trials, and it indicates, the way I read it, that we peaked out somewhere in 2008, 2009 with between 700 and 750 jury trials, and it's down to 447. Are those numbers incorrect also?
I don't know. They may very well be. Here's what I'll tell you about jury trials. It's a very inaccurate way to count our work, because a lot of our work goes into cases that don't end up in trial. For example, all of our special prosecutions, white collar, a lot of those cases, we file cases and then we get settlements. But here's the other thing. When I took office, the office was, the morale was very low in the office. We'd had 2 one-term DAs. And so last year, yes, trials were down. When we're counting trials for this year, we're about on pace to double our number of trials this year. So, you know, I was a first-year DA, and yes, it probably took me a year to get our staff up and running and the office going again. But that should be expected after 2 one-term DAs, Supervisor.
Well, I also had a chance over the weekend to look at our staffing, comparatively speaking, to other counties.
Yes.
And size-wise, and we're very healthy there.
No, we have the highest caseloads per employee of any county in the state of California, and that comes from the CDAA caseload survey that was done recently.
Okay. I believe we need some time to sort this out. As I indicated during our budget process, I do want to have a much more interactive discussion.
Yes.
I need your cooperation to have that happen.
And I'm all for that. I attend the ad hoc committee, and at that meeting last time, I proposed that we have direct meetings because the communication is not happening. I can tell you that
there's 2 sides to that story, and I'm hearing the communication is not happening, but the blame is not on the supervisors, it's not on the EO, it's on the DA's office. So let's commit to having that kind of communication, and particularly between the finance department and your office. They are the ones that have the staff, have the resources, can crunch the numbers. I'd like to resolve some of these differences in the basic data before we have a discussion about the policy.
Sure, Supervisor, but I have a question. Why would the supervisors consider a chart without anyone checking with me first or with anyone calling my office? We're back stuck in the same problem we were last year, and that is we don't pick up the phone and call each other.
It could be because when we ask you for that kind of data, it doesn't come as Supervisor
Nobody
Jeffries,
asked us.
as Supervisor Jeffries asked you, and wasn't provided for our last budget session. And I'm not going to quote the EO, but I've heard this complaint before about not getting timely response from your office in particular to requests from the EO. Let's schedule a meeting, you, Paul, Jay, and I, and any other board member would like to join us and go over that. I don't believe at this point in time that there's going to be support on this board to add to the already additional money that was added, and it's short of what you've requested.
Sort of what we need to avoid layoffs.
Or attrition, the loss of personnel.
We won't be able to cover with attrition.
Well, thank you.
I'm just telling you, I want to put you on notice that if it's got to be one or the other. If you don't find additional monies, then we've got to do layoffs, or we're going to bust appropriation 1. That's going to happen.
Your rendition here, if it is accurate, might support that. If these numbers provided by the EO and the courts are accurate, it might support the opposite position, which means that we may have to do some personnel shifting, and last resort to do that is layoffs. I recognize that, but I'm just not in a position to say, well, we're going to add more money, and that's always the answer. We don't have the money to add.
So is the direction then today for the DA's office that we hold off and wait till the first quarter?
You know, I don't make that call myself. I believe that the board will support the original recommendations on the budget, and you will need to deal with that in whatever fashion is appropriate to get to those numbers. So we'll leave it at that for now. Okay. Other Supervisor Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the way this has ended, and I'm not comfortable with sending an elected official who represents the entire county away from the podium without some answer to at least a very basic question. And I think we either have to decide. You know, this meeting needs to occur sooner rather than later if we're going to hold off on making that decision. We have two sides to a story. I've listened to the DA's presentation here and in my office. You know, I'm just not comfortable saying, go away and fix it. So I don't know if any of my colleagues agree with me on that, but something needs to be done either to buy time to give us a more thorough analysis of the entire picture, or we need to have a decision made in a more timely fashion than. So, that's my comments.
Okay. Would you like to comment on the process, or Mr. McDonald? But I do believe that we need to get together soon. I also believe that, as we discussed, Mr. Hestrin and I, in my office, the end of the first quarter, with assistance from KPMG and a good look at these numbers, would be the appropriate time to make some hard decisions. But Mr. Orr?
Sure. It's not all about trials and attorneys. It's also about investigators. I've been in a lot of discussions with the sheriff, and there are a lot of hard discussions that have to take place on mission creep.
We don't have any mission creep in our office.
Well, I hear from the sheriff about task forces.
I met with the sheriff yesterday and asked him if he had any problem with our task forces. He said no.
He can stand up. I've talked to him last night, and he can come forward and talk about it. But when we look at patrol ratios, when we look at how many investigators you have versus the other Southern California counties, there's a lot of questions that needed to be worked out with KPMG and with the board. And so I'll leave it at that, and that was the intent of those ad hoc meetings. With regards to where we're at today, what we recommended to the board was you get $6 million.
Right.
If If the board gives you more, they give you more. We'll pull it out of reserves or wherever the board directs us to take it, and we'll take direction from the board. So I do concur with you on that one, yeah.
Yes. Mr. Jeffries?
I have an idea. Why don't we do form budget committees? Oh, that's right. That was killed on a 4-1 vote. So, self-inflicted wound here, guys.
Okay, let me just say that we haven't had this kind of disconnect in the data or the discussion with other departments nearly as much as we've had with this one department. And in the case of this one department, I agree with you, we need to do a much better job of having direct discussions and back and forth to get to the bottom of what the numbers are. Mr. Ashley?
I think, I'm not prepared, to break our budget today. I'm going to stick with the recommendations. But I do think it's well, you've had a lot of back and forth here. Some interesting information went back and forth between the two of you. And I think I don't think you can wait until the end of the first quarter results come back. That's too long. I think we need to get together, you, that committee, like you suggested, follow your suggestion, but you should do that before Labor Day, if possible, and try to come up. And by that time, the district attorney should know which direction he has to go. He's asking for direction. And he's, he may not be happy with the direction, but he'll go that direction. So, but we need to work it out, see what it really is, and we might be able to you get close enough at that time you look at a situation to where you may not be 6 million. It might be another number, or it might still be 6 million. If that becomes vitally important to us to do that, we have to find someplace else within the budget. I am not going into reserves for anybody. Okay, and not at this point. We have to get more into this, and before we'll go into reserve. So I think the idea of meeting before Labor Day, as you suggested, get together with CEO, you, the DA, and try to find. You might be able to find some middle ground there, but you should do that as soon as possible.
I agree with that, and I'm going to schedule those meetings in the next 24 hours to occur as quickly as possible. Mr. Tavaloni.
Mr. Chair, I would just ask you to, as the chair, to ask Mr. Hestrin to sit down. I think you've had enough debate as to this, and I'd like to just talk about the budget, if I could.
That's fine, and we will be in touch, and we will, before Labor Day, have some further discussions and clarification of the budget line. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Hestrin. First and foremost, let me just go to the Form 11 here, or not Form 11, but Mr. Orr's. I'm going to take some time here, if you please allow me. The budget recommendations, and I'm just going to go through some wording here that I thought were very thoughtful in Mr. Orr's presentation to us, and said, in the short term, we can expect discomfort. Yeah, that's true. And we need to hold spending down. Yep, we need to hold spending down. The budget is the first step in a journey toward fiscal sustainability. The success of this multi-year plan will depend on substantial restraint to maintain overall discretionary spending flat, good word, over the next 5 years while we still deliver mission-critical county services. Modest additional gains in discretionary revenues may occur, but we also will face a potential for recessionary headwinds to blunt forecasted revenue growth. That's true. Look at what's happening around the world. It is essential that all departments adhere to their approved budgets while sustaining core services. We have no choice but to find leaner, more efficient means of accomplishing the county's mission critical. So I'm just going to stop at that because we're going into KPMG. So what it's saying to each and every one of us, especially managers, learn how to be good managers if you're not already good. And I know we have damn good managers in this organization. I've been around a long time, and I know who they are. I've worked with all of you. You're all very good managers. Some of you are newer, and you need to learn to be better. And now's the time to learn, because we're going through some really tough times. The recommendations here are great. But now I want to talk about the last couple, 3 or 4 weeks. And you heard me get pretty upset at the June 28th budget hearing, the last budget hearing we had. But first, let me talk about that. You know, I said we're panicking. Why are we panicking? Why did I say that? Just because of the testimony we just heard. You're hearing all of us, not all of us, but some say, this is the worst budget process I've seen in my entire time here. I've worked with, including these supervisors here, I've worked with 10 supervisors. And I mentioned 22 budget cycles. And I've never seen anything worse. Why? Because public safety's not getting what they've gotten in the past. We're not opening the book to public safety. And that's unfortunate. But damn it, we've been really good to public safety for 22 years. And unfortunately, we can't do it this time around. I'll be damned, I'm getting a call from Mike Ramos from San Bernardino County. You know, it's time for people to tighten the belt. The sheriff, thankfully, has done that. And Mr. Hestrin, now it's time for you to do that. And I will not support anything more than the $6 million that we're giving you. I know you're new, and it's time for you to learn to tighten your belts. And if it takes layoff, that's what you got to do. But I bet you can do it without the layoffs. Unfortunately, we were hit with $40 million because of the Gray case, and that's ongoing. Unfortunate. That's just the way it was. We're not going to get through these times by coming up with crazy ideas and just throwing hand grenades into the mix and see where they fall. Supervisor Jeffries, with all due respect, I've worked with you for many years. Some of your ideas are good. Some of them are crazy. But on the 28th, when you came back and you threw all those ideas in, especially when you tried to, deal with a $35,000 art contract again, and then throw in ideas to take away special tax areas for, the Cabazon Desert Hills project and the wine in Supervisor Ashley's district, and the wine country in Supervisor Washington's district, and the solar fund district in Supervisor Benoit's district. But I'll be darned, you forgot about the special tax district from Mead Valley in your district.
Unfortunately, it has no money.
Well, that's too bad. How did you forget that? It's going to have money someday. Conveniently forgot about it. But you threw in my boxing club and Eddie D. Smith Senior Center that we've been talking about for a year, and we're going to deal with that eventually as the city of Harupa Valley gets themselves back on their feet. Let's look at things cautiously and deliberately, Supervisor Jeffries, when you throw things out there. You worry about an art project here in this building that costs $35,000. But yet, 2 years ago, you want to transfer parks and community centers over to parks from EDA. And that's doubled the cost. Now we're reversing it. Think about the cost that resulted in. Think about the loss. Think about the millions of dollars that cost. Maybe we ought to take your amended Form 11 for the finance officer's budget that you're requesting the finance officers to look at, and have them look at supervisors' Form 11s and sometimes crazy ideas that we come up with, and have the finance officer look at our stupid ideas. and see how much those are going to cost. What do you think, Paul? Wouldn't you love doing that? You know, I've been extremely proud of this board the entire time I've been on this board. I brag about it every place I go. It's just at NACO. I see all my former colleagues at NACO and CSAC and how proud I was to spend some time with them. And then I come back to these board meetings and see today, I recall the last two board meetings, and I think about how I believe that the quality is diminishing, and I worry about it. And I hate it, because we could be so much better if we didn't have the disruption like today, or if we didn't have stupid ideas coming out of certain board members without a lot of thought. Because I know the talent on this dais is amazing. And I just ask that all my colleagues take a little bit more extra thought and energy and work with staff. And when staff comes up here, not criticize them in front of the public. If you have a problem with staff, damn it, take them in your office and drill them in your office behind closed doors, not here at the dais. They deserve better than that. And you guys know who I'm talking about. I will not support anything but the recommendations of the executive officer. We have a budget to meet. If we don't meet it well, then you can count on ourselves going down the tubes, because I've been through this before. Tough times here at this county started from the very first time I took office back in 1995, January 3rd, and I think this is the fourth cycle that I've been through. And trust me, we can do it. It's not panic time. We will get through it, and we can do it without harming our employees. Our employees are nervous right now. After coming out of a deep recession, why do you want to create more shock on them now? Because I tell you, they're nervous by the comments that we make up here. And they don't deserve that. So I want to say to the employees here, thank you for everything you do for us, and don't worry about it. We're going to get through these times. We're going to get through these times because every one of us, at least I know 4 of us up here care deeply about you, and I hope the 5th does as well. The 5th board member, sitting to my right, cares about you as well, and will work hard from this point forward to come up with good ideas, productive ideas, to ensure that as we move forward from this day on, that this county will move forward in a productive way, fiscally, and with strong, productive ideas. So, Mr. Chair, I would move approval of this budget as put forth by the Executive Office.
I'll second that, and may I make one brief comment?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll go for comments. Supervisor Washington.
And I just want to add to that motion and second, hopefully, your comments about meeting or arranging the meeting with the EO's office and the DA's office.
We're going to do that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And Supervisor Ashley.
Say something, the sheriff hasn't come up and talked today, but I want to salute the sheriff for, he's, been in these budget situations before, but every time he's told us the way it is, and then decisions have been made, and he's went out and he's accomplished that. He's been a team player every year on the budget, every year, and he is this year, and we appreciate that. But the CEO, will continue to work with the sheriff and the DA and KMPG, to get what savings we can, and then and work with the problem as we go through it. We're going to do the best we have with the means that are available to us. So I just want to make those comments, and I support approving the budget today. Many of these other items on there, I agree with the comments on these, Cabazon, the wine country, and solar. Those are programs. Some of those, you take that money, then who's going to pay it back? Some of those are, for Cabazon, that's for the Lifeline bypass road project. And Commerce has stopped out there. 40% of the goods in the United States move through there, and you have a stoppage. You're frozen. We need a way around that. It's important, to all the tourist events we have out there that draw in tremendous revenues into the county, and just people going back and forth in the county. So it's very important. And if we did this, it would basically just blow that program out, and nothing would happen. And so I would support that one. And then the wine country, similar comment. And on the solar project, we made promises to the folks that are very unhappy with these projects down there. It was affecting the area. This was sort of mitigation of that impact. And the county is still coming out way ahead on all these deals. All these, like the wine country and Cabazon, all these are going to create more revenues down there. And if we make it easier to get through that area and visit the #1 sales tax generator in the county, the premium discount stores there, and by helping that road circulation and providing the public added police protection that these funds do there, we're going to actually create more revenue and more growth to help support our county through revenue growth. So I agree with those comments there, and I'm going to support the motion. Thank you.
Supervisor Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had no idea that ideas were revolutionary here in the building. Suggestions were stupid. I really, really deeply, and I say this honestly, feel very sorry for my colleague, to know that suggestions, to look at different ways to find new efficiencies, to engage in dialogue with department heads was such an upsetting suggestion that it would require just a personal insult, one after another. I mean, I don't get that. I experienced that in Sacramento from very, limited thinking people who just couldn't agree to work outside the box that they've grown accustomed to working in for so long. And it hurts and it's shameful. We're better than that. Not one of my suggestions, not one, was to encourage layoffs. All of them were to look for efficiencies. And who thought for a minute that having Parks Department run parks was burning down villages? That idea would just require such a response. I mean, running parks, man, I guess I'm really out of touch here on some of this stuff. As I said, everything I've ever suggested was to find new efficiencies, save money. You can go back and watch the video when we created those special fund areas. Go back and watch that video. And one of the discussions was that when we hit tough budget times, we would have the flexibility of diverting those funds. And not a single member of my colleagues up here opposed to that concept of being able to divert those funds when we had a tough budget time. The mere suggestion that I put it on the list invokes that kind of response. Are you kidding me? I mean, that was what we discussed at this dais. So I'm not going to respond to every point by point because clearly there's some unstable issue going on here that I'm not aware of that is, I don't get it. I'm going to continue to offer ideas. I think that's what we're here for. We're here to show some leadership on ideas to make things run better. And I apologize sincerely if that has caused such consternation and requires personal insults. I don't get it. So do what you're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Colleagues, I have no further requests to speak. We have a motion and a second to approve the recommendations of the Executive Office with regard to the budget on item 3-61. Please vote.